This is episode 2 of the F4i 1-year review. We're going to focus on the radiator, the electrical, the tank, and the motor today. We're going to start with the radiator. I'm running the Curtis Cage's Radiator Cage, and I have it set up in the OEM fashion where I've got it bolted in here, and then it's just hooked on the nub there. One thing you want to pay attention to is this bolt will come loose, so make sure to tighten that. And then as you can see here, you can kind of see some damage on the radiator fins there, almost like it's pulling away. Like every time the bike gets dropped, like it yanks the radiator. And I believe the appropriate setup for this is to grind that nub off and drill a hole through that tab on the frame, and then just thread a bolt into the other side of the radiator cage here. So essentially you're running 2 bolts into that radiator cage, and it's holding the radiator in place instead of hanging it. The other thing I've noticed, the hoses sometimes leak. I've had some drippage down by the water pump here. The most noticeable was this hose here. So you'll just have to tighten those hose clamps every so often. These are the original hoses on a 23-year-old bike, so I can expect it to leak here and there. I'll eventually try and replace these hoses down the road. This is how I have this radiator hose routed. It comes through the cage underneath the clutch cable, and it rests on the cage there and goes up. It's not being squeezed that much here. It's hot right now, otherwise I'd lift it up and show you. You can also see on that bracket I had to rotate a little bit, otherwise this hose wasn't going to be routed well. It was kind of pinching that hose off, so you got to angle that. I'm running the Honda 50/50 coolant with some water wetter right now, and temp wise I tend to stay at somewhere in the 190s when it's pretty cool out. So like it's 60 today, so everything was below 200 unless I was getting really high in the RPMs. But for like circle work and idle stuff, like the temps stay down pretty well. Once you start getting on limiter and doing rolling burnouts and stuff like that, the temps will pick up. I've rarely had it go over like 235, and that's with the fan running. Also in the middle of summer, so it's like 90 something degrees, so you'll have to let it cool down here and there. But I'll probably switch to water at some point and see if that keeps it cooler, water with some water wetter. The other thing I do notice with the radiator is after I park it for riding like 20 minutes, that coolant hose here I will get some drippage out of. You can kind of see it's a little wet there already. My coolant reservoir likes to leak out of the cap here, so I pretty much have it empty now. I used to have it always filled up, and then I would get coolant like all over the swing arm, and I'd see it on the inside of the subframe, and it probably was leaking out of this cap every time it was in a wheelie, and obviously it drips down out of that hose down underneath the bike. But the one thing I do pay attention to is I'll just make sure that the radiator is always full, so you know it's up to the cap. I've been running it now, so I'm not touching that thing, but I really have no coolant in the reservoir anymore because all it does is leak. And obviously, like I said, temps have been fine. I pay pretty good attention to it. So that's all for the radiator there. For the exhaust, there's really not much to say. My headers are still disgustingly rusty, but there really hasn't been any leaks. I replaced the nuts on the headers there, but no leaks there. And the only thing is this clamp, probably from the pipe twisting, has kind of ruined some of the rubber, and that's from the original owner, and then this is from me when it drops on the right side, so it does get scratched up a little bit. But I mean, this is an old pipe that's been chopped up, so I don't care too much, but you don't get any damage other than that. We'll move to the switch styles panel right now. This thing has served me pretty well. My fan's still on this switch, running great. Some things that I've noticed when I installed it, one of the pins from the like 5-pin or 9-pin plug fell out, so we had to stick that back in. And then the power cable that runs the accessory power that goes to the battery, that O-ring connector on the back fell off, so I lost my fans one lot session. So we just replaced it with a more heavy-duty connector and soldered it and crimped it. Other than that, those are some pretty easy fixes, so I really can't complain too much about this panel. Like I haven't had any functional issues in terms of how the bike rode, just some minor electrical mistakes there. And this is how I have the R6 fan wired. We put in a connector, so the accessory wire off the panel to the positive wire off the battery. This way I can just pull those apart. If I ever have to take the radiator off, it's not permanently connected to the panel. So that's how I have that. Hopefully you can see my electrical is literally just kind of bunched up in here, and I zip tied it to the cross member of that frame, and you can kind of see the relay goes across there. I'll show it from the other side, and the ground for this panel goes up to a bolt underneath the tank in the middle. You can kind of see that's the relay pack there, and everything's just shoved underneath there. This electrical is just sitting right here, and it's kind of all just tucked up under here. Obviously the speedo wires come out and under this bar of the cage. So for the motor, this thing's been running strong all season. I replaced the OEM spark plugs this winter and put in some NGK spark plugs. I'll put the part number for the new ones in the description. And then here are some pictures of the OEM spark plugs that I pulled out. You'll see there's a little bit of oil on those plugs, but I just put the new ones in. That might be some gaskets leaking up there, I guess is what I read on the forums, but I'm not too concerned with it. I did an oil change finally this winter. I forgot to do one. Not that I forgot, I kind of neglected doing one all last season. The oil looked fine. There was no shavings or anything like that. So, I mean, this thing's a Honda. It can take quite the beating. But did an oil change finally, freshen it up a little bit. Rotella T6, 4 quarts. And then some of the Lucas Oil synthetic stabilizer stuff, just throw that in there. Basically, it goes up to the top of the sight glass. And this motor's been running really strong. Like, it idles steady, strong. It pulls like a train. So I can't complain about the motor at all with this. Finally, for the tank, if you lay the bike down on the right side, you will get some gas coming out of that hose there if you keep it down there long enough. So if you ever notice that, that's what's going on. I've added some extra HT Moto on the lip here, just an extra sheet on top, basically to give some extra cushion for my tank tricks. It's literally just a single sheet like that, nothing too much there. And the other thing I've noticed with this tank, I don't know if it's a leak necessarily from where the vents were welded in, but underneath the tank, when I pop it off, if you look on the top of the air box here, I'll see if I still have that picture, but there would always be this like sticky residue, and I wasn't sure if it was like glue from the foam that's glued to the underside of the tank, because he had to pull away some of that foam to weld those pieces in for the venting. But I don't know if, since that no longer made it a single piece of foam, that all the heat trapped under there, it just kind of like melts the glue and sits on top of the air box. I've never been able to determine whether or not it's gas. I mean, it smells kind of like gas, but everything kind of smells like gas underneath the tank. So it's a little hard to tell. I don't really think it's too big of a deal, because it really only stays on the top cover of the air box, and I'll just wipe it every time I pop open the tank. But I think that's pretty much it for this second episode of the F4i review. Hopefully that gives you a better idea on how some of this electricals ran and how some of the internals of the bike are functioning.
Hottest stash in the carpet. Yeah, we trapping out apartments. I ain't done where you start shit.